Electricast. Welcome to Her Extraordinary Life by Design, where we celebrate women who are shaping their lives one extraordinary day at a time. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, self-care coach for women who are ready to make self-care a priority to support them in life and business. Every week, I'll be speaking with inspiring women from various walks of life who will share their personal journeys and will discover how they have fearlessly carved their own paths as business owners, passionately pursuing their dreams and creating a meaningful impact on their communities. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to Extraordinary Life by Design podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, and I just want to say thank you for listening in. I truly appreciate you as a listener, as a follower of the show, and I'm always hoping that you find value in each and every episode. And so today, as you listen in, I want to talk about why I believe that integrity and money go hand in hand, and that financial decisions require internal steadiness. Because I know that you probably already see yourself as someone who values integrity, right? You care about doing things right, the right way. You think through consequences. You don't make decisions casually, especially when money's involved. You hold yourself to a standard, and most of the time you meet it. But here's something that doesn't always get talked about, because even women who value integrity deeply, who make thoughtful, ethical decisions, sometimes they can look back at their financial choices and feel a disconnect. Not because it was a reckless choice or wrong, but because something about it didn't fully sit right afterwards. And that's not a character issue or flaw. It's not a morality issue. It's not about being good or bad with money. It's about what happens to your internal steadiness when pressure is present in those moments. Because pressure changes things, right? It narrows your focus, it speeds up your thinking, and it can make urgency feel like clarity. And when that happens, integrity doesn't usually collapse because you stopped caring. It shifts because your internal system is carrying more strain than you realize. So this episode isn't about right versus wrong per se. It's about what happens to values under pressure and what integrity actually requires internally when money's involved, when we're making decisions. You see, high responsibility spaces, they don't wait for perfect internal conditions. Most times being responsible means moving fast, where our decisions get made quickly, where consequences are real, and there isn't always space to sit with something for long. And so you become so used to that rhythm. You're used to weighing impact in real time, to reading the room, reading the numbers, reading the implications, and being the steady one. And most of the time, you are the steady one. But there are moments, those small, subtle ones where something can feel off. Not necessarily wrong, just off, where you don't really feel fully settled. Because maybe you said yes to something a little faster than you intended to. Maybe you agreed to terms on something that you were talking through with someone that felt almost aligned, but not quite. Or maybe you chose the option that keeps everything smooth instead of the one that would require a harder conversation. And later, sometimes hours later, maybe even days, weeks later, you notice it, right? That internal friction, that second look at a choice that technically made sense at the time you made it, that sense that you moved from pressure instead of steadiness. You see, it's easy to point to timing, to workload, to the external demands that are present in those moments, right? And those things are real. But when you slow it down, you realize something else was present too. Not a lack of values, not a gap in your integrity, but just pressure on your internal system. Because integrity rarely wavers due to character. It wavers when steadiness isn't available in the moment the decision is being made. And that's the part we don't talk about enough, because it's not what you choose, but what state you're in when you choose it. So if integrity doesn't actually falter because of character, but because steadiness wasn't available in the moment, then the real question becomes what happens internally before you even realize something's off. Because values don't disappear, because you still care, you still want to do things the right way, you still hold yourself to a high standard, but pressure has a way of narrowing your field of view, because it speeds your thinking, compresses your options, and makes what's efficient feel urgent, what's aligned feel negotiable. And it's not because you stopped valuing integrity, but because something in your internal system was under strain. And most of the time, you don't even clock that shift. You just move. You move because that's what high responsibility environments require. But what often goes unexamined is what it costs to keep making values-based decisions when your internal steadiness is thin. The extra effort it takes to hold your ground, the internal recalibration afterward, the subtle discomfort that lingers long afterwards, longer than it should. And over time, that accumulation changes how decisions feel because they start to take more energy. They require more containment, and they leave less room inside you afterwards for clarity, for calm, to feel settled, to exhale. You see, integrity isn't sustained by intention alone. It requires internal steadiness because when your system's regulated, alignment's accessible, right? Choices don't feel compressed. They don't require self-correction later. They don't echo long afterward, pulling you back in to second guess them. And that's the lens we're going to look through today. There's this belief that if our values are strong enough that we'll act in alignment with them no matter what, because you've built your identity around doing things the right way. You don't make casual choices, you think in layers. You weigh impact before you move. You consider implications most people don't even see. Because you don't just decide, you account for what your decisions set in motion, and you move with awareness of consequence. So, of course, integrity should hold. Of course, your principles should guide you. Of course, you should be able to rely on them, right? And most of the time you do. But what can get overlooked is that our values don't operate in a vacuum. They operate inside our nervous system, inside a body that's processing pressure, inside a mind that's juggling timelines, expectations, and outcomes. And when that internal system's compressed, when your decisions are fast, the stakes are high, and space to breathe is thin, your values don't disappear, they just get overridden because pressure changes how information is processed. It narrows your field of view, it speeds your thinking, and it prioritizes resolution over reflection. And in that state, what feels efficient can subtly outrank what feels aligned, not because you stopped caring, but because your internal steadiness wasn't fully available. The belief assumes that integrity is purely a matter of principle, that if you know what's right, you'll choose it. But what it misses is this. Knowing what matters and having the internal steadiness to act from it are not the same thing. And that gap, that space between value and capacity, is where pressure can distort alignment before you even notice it. You see, once you see that belief clearly, the belief that strong values alone should be enough, you begin to notice what it's been requiring of you internally. Because this pattern, it doesn't create chaos or derail your life. Not at all. Business goes on as usual. You keep performing, you keep delivering, you keep handling and getting things done. And because it doesn't interrupt the surface of your life, the cost hides in plain sight. And from the outside, nothing looks compromised because you're still deciding, you're still considering impact, you're still upholding your standards. But internally, you might replay a conversation later that evening, maybe revisiting the tone you used, reconsidering an agreement you made, maybe even trying to justify why the decision, was necessary, and maybe it didn't feel entirely clean at the time, and now you're carrying it with you. And this is what can happen when decisions are made under pressure, because they rarely feel wrong in the moment. They could, however, feel slightly off. And so as you manage that feeling, you explain it to yourself, you contextualize it, you convince yourself why it made sense. But somewhere underneath that mental explanation is a tightening, a small internal split between what you value and how the moment unfolded. And that split requires energy to hold because your internal steadiness wasn't fully available when the decision was made. Now, over time, this creates something cumulative because you begin second guessing yourself more than you used to, finding yourself internally defending choices no one else is questioning, and maybe even feeling the need to prove even to yourself that it was reasonable. And the toll can show up as a little less ease in your body, a little less trust in your instincts, and a little more vigilance the next time a similar situation arises. And when that pattern repeats enough times, you begin trusting your post-decision analysis more than your initial internal signal. And that's where self-trust can take a hit because self-trust doesn't collapse, it thins. Internal congruence doesn't disappear, it just becomes slightly harder to access. And emotional ease, the kind that lets you close the day cleanly, becomes conditional. It's a system under strain. Because when pressure compresses your internal capacity, your values are still there, but acting from them costs more. And when acting from your values costs more energy than it should, you start relying on effort to maintain alignment, control instead of clarity, and constant self management instead of ease. That's the cost when values are expected to hold without internal support. That quiet erosion of internal congruence, the feeling of carrying decisions longer than necessary, the subtle distance from yourself that's harder to name but easy to feel. And over time, that's what makes living from your values feel like something you have to manage instead of something that supports you. And once you start to see how much energy it's taking to carry those decisions that don't feel entirely clean, the questions begin to shift, not towards fixing yourself, but more towards noticing what's actually happening. Because instead of asking, how do I keep performing at this level without missing anything, you begin to wonder, what would it feel like if handling it well didn't require so much internal effort? If making decisions felt easy, felt calm? And what begins to surface is that you realize that what you actually want is to be able to make decisions without the aftertaste, right? To choose and feel finished, to say yes or no and not replay the tone, the timing, or the reasoning later that night, especially when it disrupts your sleep. You want your values to feel steady, to trust that when you move quickly, you're still moving cleanly, and to stay connected to yourself internally while the stakes are high and the pace doesn't slow down. Because when you're able to make those decisions that don't require internal management afterward, where conversations don't need revisiting and your agreements don't need justification, you leave the conversation, the room, the decision, and nothing in you will feel split. Because you're not bracing, you're not rehearsing or adjusting the narrative in your head. You're living from integrity, and it feels natural and not something you have to actively maintain through effort. Because at your level, it's not just about doing better, it's about feeling aligned while you're doing what you already do so well, where your decisions feel clean and your energy settles instead of staying alert, not because you became more principled, but because you became more steady. And this is where something can begin to reorganize internally, not externally, internally. The shift doesn't announce itself. It shows up in awareness and how you notice yourself thinking before you absorb the tension and call it responsibility, where you pause and you begin to see that integrity was never the fragile part, that your values were never weak, that they didn't disappear under pressure. They just didn't have steadiness supporting them. And that's important because when you notice this, you start to recognize that pressure doesn't erase values, it overrides them. Not intentionally, but because pressure speeds up your processing, it narrows your internal bandwidth, and it makes urgency feel necessary. And in that state, even intelligent decisions can feel slightly off afterwards. Not because they're wrong, but because when making them from a state that's not supportive means that they're being made while your system is holding tension. And when you recognize that integrity isn't just about intention, that it's about internal capacity, you start to notice the difference between deciding from steadiness and deciding while holding tension. So, like I mentioned in last week's episode, that when it comes to making financial decisions or really any decision at all, the difference isn't always visible on paper because the numbers can look identical, the agreement can be the same, the outcome can be defensible, but internally, that's where it lands differently. Because when steadiness is present, decisions settle, they don't linger. They don't ask for justification later, and they don't replay in the background while you're trying to rest. They feel complete, and you begin trusting that feeling. And you start to notice that when your internal system's supported, your values don't need reinforcement, they express naturally. Responsibility doesn't feel like pressure, it feels like clarity because you're still decisive, right? You're still thoughtful, capable, but there's less internal management happening after the fact, less bracing, less monitoring, less self-checking to make sure everything holds. Because you are no longer expecting your values to withstand strain on their own. You're supporting them with steadiness first. You understand that your internal state matters. And when that steadiness leads, integrity stops feeling like something you have to actively uphold and becomes embodied. Because you don't have to grip your principles. You don't have to defend your reasoning internally. You don't have to tighten around decisions to keep them feeling secure. You just notice that alignment becomes accessible again because your internal state's no longer under strain. And when steadiness is present, even high responsibility decisions feel congruent, and you're no longer asking strength to compensate for internal strain. And instead, you're allowing steadiness to hold what strength used to carry alone. And that's the shift that you can experience, not in what you decide, but in how you experience when you're deciding. So I want you to take a moment with me to think about a recent decision that you made, whether it's money or something else. And it doesn't have to be the biggest decision or the most dramatic one, just something that mattered. Okay, now that you have that memory in place, I want you to think about what it felt like in your body when you made it, the internal tone you were holding at the time, the state you were in while you chose. Maybe it made complete sense logically, and maybe you even defended it well, convincing yourself it was the right move. But afterward, something lingered, something changed, like an aftertaste, a slight internal hum. Now, instead of evaluating the outcome, I want you to rewind internally just for a moment. Can you remember the circumstances? Do they feel clear to you? Because I want you to take a moment and remember when you made that decision, what was happening around you? Was your day already full? Was your mind already holding too many pieces, too many moving pieces? Were you carrying more than usual, even if you weren't naming it? Was steadiness available or were you operating from momentum? And again, this isn't about changing anything. It's about noticing and becoming aware of your patterns because sometimes what stands out isn't the actual decision, but in how you quickly decided and how little space there was between responsibility and response and how familiar it felt to override an internal signal because things were moving fast. And maybe today, as you're remembering, you actually start to notice that there's been a pattern, which could simply be that you don't often question the pressure. You question yourself instead, assuming you can handle it, assuming steadiness will catch up later, assuming strength will compensate. And most of the time it does, but what if this reflection isn't about capability at all? What if it's simply about you becoming aware of the internal climate you've been deciding from? Because the moment that you begin noticing the state that you were in without judging it, without correcting it, you create space. And that space that you allow for is where steadiness has room to return to, not because you force it, but because you allow yourself to see what was already there. Now, as I sit with everything that we've talked about today, integrity, pressure, internal steadiness, what keeps standing out to me is that it's not about the decisions themselves, but the internal experience of carrying them that determines whether they resolve internally or continue asking for your energy. Because decisions don't just exist in outcomes or final conversations. They live in the moments where you're holding responsibility without pause, where you evaluate impact while staying composed, where you manage pressure internally so that nothing spills externally. And that internal layer rarely gets named, especially when you're someone others rely on to be thoughtful, measured, steady, reliable. There isn't always space to say that decision is sitting heavier than I expected, or I handled it well, but I'm still carrying it. And because you're so accustomed to carrying things well, what often goes unnoticed is how much of it you normalize. Because when you're the one expected to be steady, there aren't many rooms where you get to explore the internal side of responsibility without it turning into advice, strategy, or performance. And I keep thinking about how different it feels when there is space like that, a place where the internal experience of holding responsibility is understood without being analyzed or corrected, where integrity isn't something you perform, it's something you're supported in sustaining, and where steadiness isn't assumed, it's strengthened. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I'm building, because what we've been talking about today, the internal experience of carrying responsibility, the way decisions linger, the way pressure gets managed, and how our energy can affect our decisions, financial or otherwise, this is just one layer of the conversations that I'm creating space for, because I know this way of thinking deserves a space where it doesn't have to be explained or defended, where you can come as you are, feel what you feel, and let the experience land without defending it, which is why I'm building the Yes Reset community, a private invitation-only space for women in law. Where inside this community, we're going to spend time with the kinds of patterns that we've touched on today, the ones that don't always show up on the surface, but they shape how we live, how we lead, how we decide, and how we carry our daily responsibilities. And I feel that it's so important for there to be a forum, a place where we can have these kinds of conversations, where we slow down and look at our patterns together and we're able to share in the moments where nothing needs to be fixed, only that we feel that we're heard, that we're seen, that we're understood. I want it to be a space that doesn't rush you to solutions. I'm building this space around creating room to notice what's actually happening internally and what changes when that experience is acknowledged instead of managed in isolation. This community isn't officially open yet. It's not live because I'm still in the building phase. I'm building it intentionally for and with the women it's meant to serve. So if you're listening in today and you're thinking, that's what I need a space where this way of thinking is understood, then I want to hear from you. Or maybe right now you don't even know exactly what you'd want yet. You're not sure what a space like this could be for you, what could hold for you, but something about it resonates with you. That's exactly what matters most at this stage. And I want to hear from you because as I'm building this, I'm not guessing what women in law need. I'm gathering the data. I'm listening to your words. I'm paying attention to how you experience responsibility, decisions, and pressure, and letting that shape what this community becomes. So if you simply have questions and you want to start a dialogue, you can reach out to me by email, which you'll find in the show notes. Or if this is something you definitely are interested in and you want to be part of building it, you can apply through the link in the show notes to join the waitlist, share what you'd want a space like this to hold so that I can build it in a way that actually reflects how you think, how you decide, and how you carry responsibility, and that it has the kind of support you would like to see inside the container, and we can build it together. So again, be sure to check the show notes. Now, as you move back to your day, I hope that what you take away from this episode leaves you with a clearer understanding of what's actually been costing you energy and feeling steadier as you move into what's next. I also want you to remember that integrity isn't something you perform. It's not something that you prove. And when you lead from integrity, it's not something that disappears when pressure enters the room. What changes under pressure isn't your character, it's your capacity. And that's a very different thing. Values don't fail, but systems under strain start compensating. They start tightening by staying alert and bracing. And when that happens for long enough, integrity can start to feel like something you have to maintain. You have to work to maintain instead of something that naturally guides you. Feeling internally supported has always been what allows integrity to stay intact. Because when you're not operating from tension, you don't have to grip your values. You don't have to defend them. You don't have to rehearse them to make sure they still hold, because they just do. And that's what I hope you carry with you from today's episode. So as you think about responsibility and the decisions in front of you this week, notice what state you're in when you make them. Because sometimes what changes everything isn't the choice, it's the internal state you bring to it. Thanks for listening in today. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep believing, and keep designing your extraordinary life one day at a time. Thank you for joining me on Her Extraordinary Life by Design. I hope you've been inspired and empowered by the incredible stories shared on this show. If you enjoyed this episode and the conversations we've had, I would greatly appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback and support mean the world to me, and it will help others discover the podcast and join our empowering community. Remember to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Together, we can continue to learn from these amazing women, uncover their extraordinary journeys, and be motivated to create our own lives by design. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, stay empowered and keep shaping your extraordinary life one day at a time.
For those of you who dream of a world where music and podcasts live together in perfect harmony, now, for the first time, Electricast gives you a magical compilation, Pod Till You Drop, Volume 1, where we give you the best in tunes and the best in podcasts. Feast your ears and hear the culture. Available now wherever you listen to music.
Why is it that games make us feel so good or completely rage quit? These emotions we feel are mostly not an accident. People like me designed them. I'm Chris Cross, and this is Brain Arcade, a podcast all about the psychology of game design and why games hit us so hard. Each week, I bring on a new guest, designers, psychologists, storytellers, to break it all down with me. If you play, design, or just love games, follow now.
Electricast. Electricast.